So, I was having a conversation recently and I came up with a phrase. I'm going to say, I'm going to make it sound a little bit more momentous than that. I've coined a term, exploitative femininity, because I was thinking about the dynamics in an office when we talk about, cultural transformation, when we talk about inclusive behaviour, when we talk about gender equality. And one of the key things that undermines gender equality, that undermines inclusive behaviour, is what I call exploitative femininity. So I know some of you might come for me, but bear with me and I'll explain what I mean. And I can think of some personal situations as well, which it's been the case. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because it's so destructive. But also, I just want to kind of flag it and highlight it to say these are the things you need to look out for. Because without looking out for these particular signs, you essentially miss sometimes what can be the undermining of somebody else's success, or how somebody is continuously targeted by one particular person, and it seems to continuously fly on the radar. And then when you get to the point of the person leaving, it's like, I didn't see that coming, but there were signs. Maybe the conversation had been brought up, but the other person was excused. So what is exploitative femininity? The concept behind it for me is this. It's usually, and I'm saying it's usually a woman, but men can also technically display this, but it tends to be a situation that happens amongst women. And the reason why I'm going to leave it as amongst women as I go through, because I've experienced it. A lot of women that I've spoken to have experienced it, and it just seems to happen within the female community. And what it is usually there's one particular woman in the office who, is very, very nice and amenable to women, to men. But if you talk to, in the worst case scenario, when men talk about her, they say she's a little bit dramatic. She's a little bit dramatic, but they try to stay away from her. She's a little bit complicated. I don't really mess around with her too much. I don't really want to work with her too much. I don't really want to deal with her. She's a little bit messy. But for women, and especially women of colour, this particular woman can actually be a threat to your career, but also she can be the catalyst for you needing to leave. Because usually what happens is there's a lot of psychological warfare going on, but to the face of men who may be your boss, she's very sweet and light. But to the face of women, she's very direct. She's very backhanded sometimes in the way she deals with you. She comes across to men as sweet and light, but to women, she's passive aggressive, she's manipulative, and she seeks to make things more difficult for the other women. And usually what happens is when things come to a head, she uses tears to get out of the situation. Or alternately, the boss says, I'm going to stay away from this because this is women's stuff. If you bring it up to HR, sort it out amongst yourselves. It feels they may not say childish, they may not say playground-like, but what they mean is go and sort it out amongst yourselves. This isn't really a big issue. There are bigger things going on in the company than somebody potentially not being nice. As a black woman, you usually end up in the situation where you become labelled the aggressor, which then leads to, another cycle, which I've spoken about before, which is basically the writings on the wall. You feel like you want to leave. But on the other side of this is what I say to companies. In the moment that you're in a situation that potentially you think to yourself, it's not that important, let them sort it out amongst themselves. Stop. Because this is part and parcel as to why women who display this level of exploitative femininity continue to perpetuate discrimination and continue to perpetuate discrimination amongst women and bullying amongst women, because they're always seen as A, being vulnerable, B, it's not their fault, C, she didn't mean it that way. So they're always protected, but this isn't a coincidence. This behaviour isn't coincidental. In fact, it's the very opposite. This behaviour is particularly calculated to ensure that they can keep perpetuating what they want to, in order to make sure the women who stand in their way leave the company. And this is the part for me that's really significant. This is the part for me that we have to understand, is that in the moment that you feel like, oh, this is playground stuff, I don't want to deal, and also I don't want to deal with this. And this is whether you're leadership or HR, can't they just, no, they can't just sort it out amongst themselves, because there's a larger context to this. And usually if you take the time to investigate the track record of this one person, it's usually not an isolated affair. But memories are short. And that's not a criticism. Memories are short. We're all time poor. Everyone has so many other things that they feel like are a priority. But this particular one, this particular type of what I've called exploitative femininity, is the enemy from within. It's the one, it's the one thing we can talk about. How can you retain more Black women? We can talk about, what support structures can you provide to support more Black women, to support more women of colour. But if you don't look at one of the most destructive types of behaviours that flies under the radar continuously, because the perpetrator is often portrayed as the victim, the company fundamentally can't succeed. Can't. In reaching your goal to attract, to include, to engage, to retain Black women, because if this particular type of woman consistently displays this behaviour, consistently gets away with it, and in a lot of cases is then promoted. And a lot of cases, I've spoke to quite a few different women about this. The same woman who perpetrates this often ends up being the head of the women's ERG. Why? Because there's also a very carefully constructed story that she has also been on the receiving end of bullying, discrimination, etc., etc., whilst herself still being a bully, whilst then being given the powers from above that says, well, hey, she's good at her job, she's experienced all this stuff, we want her to do this. And in so doing, you further alienate the group you seek to engage, to retain, because you're not listening. And when I say listening, I don't just mean listening with your ears, I mean listening, analysing, really taking that extra moment to say, what's going on here? Because I'll spin it just for 2 more seconds another way. When people talk about being in relationships and they have no luck, etc., etc., what do dating counselors and relationship counsellors say? Well, the common denominator is the person who's complaining. So it can't always necessarily be that everybody else is the problem. And this is what I wanted to say, start to look at the trends. Is there a person who's constantly landing in your office as a leader that says, oh, XYZ done that to me and this person's not being very nice to me? And think about it. Don't just take it for face value. Don't just react to the behaviours. Create a transparent process to talk about the issues. Yes, it's hard work, but it's also part of people management. The difficulty is in having the conversation, but the result is nipping it in the bud and getting rid of and showing through actions that this type of exploitative femininity is not permitted. What else? If it's HR, are you, as somebody sitting HR, are you jumping to their defense saying, well, let's call this person? How are you investigating it? Are you asking them to provide you with tangible evidence? Because part and parcel of this behaviour is what I call weaponized tears. Tears make most people feel uncomfortable, myself included. Well, sometimes. Weaponized tears, right? This person cries, this woman cries, nobody wants to deal with it. They're like, Okay, how can we make this better? How do we stop the crying? Well, sometimes the crying is just a tactic to distract you from really asking real questions. There it is. So think about it. Understand that it's not just about policies, processes, procedures, mentors, sponsorship. It's about really getting down into the types of behaviours that are excused, that are overlooked, and that deliberately fly under the radar so that they can continually be perpetuated. So I hope you found that helpful. Yes, and as I said, I very momentously coined the term exploitative femininity, because this is really, when I listen to women's stories and I think of my own, unfortunately, the dynamics being twofold. It might have been a woman that was trying to cause problems for me, but men who were in power did not try to help because they believed it was women's problems that women should sort out amongst themselves. We'll leave that over there, that's too emotional, that's too much drama. And in doing so, allowed many a woman to carry on with the types of behaviours that ultimately made me think, well, I don't want to stay here anymore. And I know that I'm not alone. So thank you for your time, as usual. And please let me know. Please feel free to share in the comments. I mean, you don't have to share them in the comments because it's a very intimate subject. But, if it resonates, if you've also experienced this, or how, how has the situation, if at all, been resolved for you? Because I know for a lot of people, it remains unresolved and the resolution is actually your exit. But then more often than not, the situation happens again. So, as I said, thank you so much for your time and have a great day. Bye.